So this afternoon, it's a workshop. Now, the warning to you is that workshops are not just lectures, they're interactive. And so therefore, we hope and expect you to contribute in terms of questions, only easy ones, the easy ones to me, the difficult ones to Emily, and to really try to engage with the subject matter so that we have a feeling that at the end of the session, we have been able to get across some of our experiences and what we have learned and what we have been able to address in terms of reducing stillbirths through the better recognition of fetal growth restriction. So and thank you, Nuzat, for that introduction. And the last minute request before we left about favorite this and that, and was an interesting challenge, actually. So essentially, one of the things that the Perinatal Institute prides itself on, and is one of the things that we always want to achieve, is to serve and to assist clinicians to provide better care. And within the National Health Service, of course, it was particularly important, apart from the Queen's Awards that Nuzat kindly mentioned, was that we won an award for the best not-for-profit organization working in partnership with the NHS. And of course, as we'll mention later, we subsequently extended what we've been learning through research as well and data sets from different countries, also to extend it and to assist mothers and babies and clinicians wherever they are. And so we're working with many different units in different countries, but of course our collaboration with India and in particular the Fernandez Foundation has been ongoing for some time, I think well over 10 years. So where did this all start? Well, we were in the NHS and my task was given, I mean, even before then as a clinician, I felt that sometimes our care was insufficient from the perspective of pregnancy failing, ending in stillbirth, and we did not know why. And that was something that's been bothering me every day as a clinician, and I was given the task to look at the cases in a sort of more thorough way, because in the West Midlands, where the West Midlands Perinatal Institute started, we had actually the highest stillbirth rate in the UK and therefore in Western Europe, because the UK already had a high rate then. And so we looked at confidential inquiries in a multidisciplinary way with to obstetricians, to neonatologists, to midwives, and other care providers. And it was confidential in the sense that the notes were anonymized. And what we found time and time again, that many of these instances had avoidable factors, problems with the risk assessment at the beginning of pregnancy, the charts that were being used, the plotting, the referrals, whether they happened or did not happen in a multidisciplinary team, and whether or not there was intervention when it had to be done. And one of the things that we were up against was that many of these stillbirths were categorized as unexplained, using the then commonly applied Wigglesworth classification, which I'm just going to find a mouse here, what was called antepartum unexplained, which was the sort of largest category, 2/3, and then other factors running alongside. So the problem, of course, with categorizing something as unexplained is that as clinicians, we'll say, well, it was unexplained, there's nothing we could have done about it. And I remember going even as a registrar or SHO, senior house officer, to meetings, and people presented the cases, and then the pathologist perhaps stood up and said that couldn't find very much, and even the baby size was normal because they were using pathology tables to assess whether the baby was or was not growth restricted. And of course, the samples, the cadavers that they got were a selective sample cohort of dead babies. So therefore, to actually assess whether or not they should have been of a larger size, a term alluded to them. I remember that going down to the pathology lab and in the bowels of the Queen's Medical Center in Nottingham and say that, can you tell me, this is after one of those meetings, and they say, what standard do you use? And this was a standard based on other stillbirths. So you're going around in circles and you never pick up the fact that, in fact, these babies should have been better grown. And so the growth restriction was missed, and the classification system did not help with that at all, because it had this category. And there was no category for growth restriction or even for small for gestation age. And that's what we did to start with. And this is, I think back in 2005, we published in the BMJ a paper which looked at a new classification system, which we called RECODE, relevant condition at death. I purposely did not call it cause of death, because at this stage we were not interested in, oops, going the wrong way, I think. At this stage we were not interested in the actual cause. We were, of course, interested in cause, but very often there was no apparent cause if the pregnancy was not monitored properly and so on. What we wanted to see is how many of these babies actually came out smaller than they should be. And therefore, SGA, but to get the attention of the health service, we called it then fetal growth restricted. And so that was a bit of a jump there, because obviously not all SGA babies are growth restricted, although you could say that if you're SGA and dead, then it is likely that this was associated. But nevertheless, what we call this is the relevant condition at death. In other words, there was no argument whether or not you know or do not know the cause, but it is relevant from the clinical point of view that this baby is smaller than it should be, because that's when you should be starting to act and assess and put this pregnancy proactively into higher risk category and decide, in fact, which investigations and when to deliver, when to get that baby out from an apparently unfavorable intrauterine environment. So that was the RECODE classification, and when we compared that with Wigglesworth classification, we found that most of these hitherto unexplained stillbirths were, in fact, fetal growth restricted, 65%. And at the same time, would reduce the proportion of stillbirths that were unexplained from the 60-odd% there to 17%. And tomorrow, in my talk, I will briefly mention that I was very pleased to see that different countries felt that they could adopt this fairly straightforward classification system. And in particular, in India, there have been several recent papers that I'll mention that find it also useful number one, to reduce the number of stillbirths that are unexplained, and number two, to actually identify that they're not just unexplained, that there were babies that were smaller than they should be. However, if you put your categorization or your definition of FGR or SGA at the end of a failed pregnancy or stillbirth pregnancy, then you have to be sure about what the what the limit is, what your cutoff is in terms of what you define SG. Let's say we agree is less than 10 centile. If it's really FGR, is less than third centile, but less than 10 centile is really the sort of categorization that is usually used to try to catch all those babies that are at risk. Sorry, was it not loud enough? You should have shouted. So in a workshop, you're allowed to get up and say, "Sir, we need you to shout." And so the cutoff is really important, and therefore we needed to make sure that and I'll elaborate on that a little bit later, that we use the right classification, which is then actually focused on not just the population in which you're working in, but to the particular mother, because obviously not all mothers, not all babies are the same, and that's where the concept of customization comes from. And then the other study we did, again in the West Midlands region, and so we established a routine data collection system from all the hospitals, 19 hospitals around the West Midlands region. And we wanted to see what are the risk factors, how strong is the risk factor of being small for gestation age at birth, in live births and stillbirths. What are the risk factors associated with generally speaking, with adverse outcome? And we found that small size, fetal growth restriction, was the single largest contributing factor to stillbirth. And so if there was no fetal growth restriction, the stillbirth rate was lower. And when there was fetal growth restriction, it was 7-fold higher. But then we observed something which was an added bonus, which was we found that if you recognize antenatally that the baby is small, then the stillbirth risk drops. And if you don't recognize it, then it doubles. So here was almost the first time, there were one or two smaller papers before as well, that showed that antenatal recognition of growth restriction works. It does contribute to reducing adverse outcome, and in particular stillbirth. And what was also interesting is that by recognizing it, and therefore acting, and therefore, in most instances, delivering the baby, but investigating first to make sure that you know what you're doing and you are not delivering unnecessarily, for example, for constitutional smallness, then we found that we are not filling up the neonatal units with preterm babies. The average lower gestation age, by recognizing antenatally and reducing stillbirth risk, was only 10 days. And that is because most of the cases that you see are in fact late onset growth restriction. I'm sure you're all aware of the distinction that has become ever clearer in the last few years. And it's been sort of now agreed that the distinction would be, and in terms of gestational age, about 32 weeks. So early onset, before 32 weeks. The problem there is management, of course, because of the prematurity and its associated risk. There, generally speaking, the degree of placental disease is high, and the hypoxia is frank. It's severe hypoxia. Late onset growth restriction, the problem is diagnosis because the degree of placental disease is lower. And I always see it as a way in which the baby is outgrowing the capacity of the placenta to sort of support its continued growth. So that's a more subtle hypoxia. And that's where, for example, we'll be talking tomorrow about growth velocity without being small will be an important aspect, an additional tool or measurement or parameter how to assess and make sure that you capture these babies with poorly functioning placenta in time. So early and late onset and the predominance of late onset growth restriction as a problem explained that antenate recognition reduced the average gestational age only by a week and a half. So here then we had the evidence. Case reviews showed that many cases were avoidable. Stillbirth classification suggested that many of these unexplained stillbirths were SG or FGR, and the epidemiology showed that many of these instances are potentially avoidable by early recognition of growth restriction, and that fetal growth restriction is a frequent precursor of adverse outcome, hence potentially avoidable. So that's actually a shift in concept and a realization for clinicians to say that, yes, we can do something about it. But of course, I'm only talking about one subject here, which is fetal growth. This Congress will be discussing other factors, of course, which are, some of them are and some of them are not avoidable. But from the point of view of fetal growth restriction, it is avoidable if recognized in time. Hence, it is worth focusing on it, and that's what really we have been doing for the last 10, 20 years, and I'm pleased to say with some considerable positive effect, including here in Hyderabad, I'm pleased to say, which we'll get to a bit later on. So the concept in terms of improving the practice antenatally to move towards this being number one, to be aware that this is an issue rather than focusing on some other things which are also important or maybe not important. So the history, identification of risk factors, essential to make sure that the assessment of risk is done properly, because there's low risk and high risk, and in terms of recognition or the prevalence of growth problems, it is completely different. Serial fundal height measurement in low-risk pregnancies. Serial is very important because fundal height measurement is not just a one-off. It's got lots of variation, lots of noise, as it were. So longitudinal growth rate, growth velocity again. Serial ultrasound biometry in high-risk pregnancies. Biophysical assessment, Doppler where required. We won't talk about that much today. And monitoring the performance, including the rate of antenatal detection of SGA. And this monitoring, this audit is very important. And we want to focus on several of these points because this then became the GAP, the Growth Assessment Protocol. And this is where I'm pleased to hand over to Emily. Emily Butler is our senior midwife and is the program manager, midwifery program manager in the Perinatal Institute and the national and international GAP lead. So over to you, Emily.
Can you hear me okay? As a midwife, I don't usually, we'll go with you. Okay, so as Jason nicely introduced and gave some of the history of how we developed the GAP programme and covering the 5 elements, the growth assessment protocol in the UK is established in about 3/4 of all hospitals and more sites internationally are now adopting the programme. We incorporated into the surveillance protocol a pragmatic care pathway for each users, which includes some of the key elements from other national recommendations. Starting with the history and identification of risk factors at the early booking assessment, determine whether pregnancy should be managed as low or high risk. So ensuring right from the get-go at that first appointment that the mothers and the women are on the correct care pathway. Utilising our gap care pathway as a tool to appropriately identify the risk factors for SGA and for FGR. These are the risk factors which are present at the beginning of pregnancy. So, for instance, if the mother is a smoker, if she uses any drugs, or perhaps she's had a previous small baby, or in fact a previous stillbirth. And their presence or not will then determine the care pathway the mother should be cared for. So if women are low risk and they have no risk factors for FGR or SGA, then they would be suitable for serial fundal height measurement. Starting ideally from around 26 to 28 weeks, every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the third trimester until delivery. If they're not suitable for fundal height measurement, so perhaps they have fibroids or they have a raised BMI, then we would recommend serial scans throughout that third trimester. And according to the risk factors which are prevalent in your population, we would recommend that scans should be performed 3 to 4 weekly until delivery. We also would recommend early consultant assessment to triage for either serial growth scans or, depending on the severity of the risk factors, whether or not maternal fetal medicine specialist care throughout. So for our low risk women, the standardised fundal height is the tool, as Jason said, for longitudinal assessment. If there aren't a standardised fundal height pathway, then there should be a standardised method to perform the measurements. The gestational age should not come into consideration, so you shouldn't consider that because the woman is 34 weeks that she will be 34 centimetres. You should use the individualised approach using that standardised method. A serial assessment to assess the growth trajectory throughout that third trimester. So as Jason said, a one-off measurement isn't helpful. We need a serial trajectory to assess. Plotting them on customised growth charts and ensuring that there is a clear pathway for referral when there is a concern from the trajectory or from fundal height measurement. So it's important that we standardise our practice. Intra-observer variation would be me standardising my practice to make sure that when I see women, my practice is consistent and I'm consistently getting the same results. The inter-observer variation is the things that we can do as a team. So the practice between practitioners has also the consistency in their results. So then we kind of move away from looking at charts and going, oh, so-and-so always measures a little bigger than me. It's making sure we're all measuring the same way. Of course, when we are doing a fundal height measurement on the mother, we should ensure that the bladder is empty. A full bladder can easily add 2 to 3 centimetres onto the SFH height. So it's important, again, that we mitigate that. That we use a paper tape measure, firstly for hygiene purposes, but also over time, the retractable, elasticated ones, they tend to stretch and can make your results slightly inconsistent. So it's important that you use a paper tape measure, and then it's always quite nice to pop in mum's notes so she can, keep it throughout her pregnancy and then do the measurements of the baby with the same tape measure when it's born. So if you're doing fundal height measurements, as I said before, we would recommend a baseline plot around 26 to 28 weeks of gestation and then every 2 to 3 weeks throughout that third trimester until delivery. When we are doing a fundal height measurement, it doesn't matter what the position or the presentation of the baby, your practice would remain the same. The only time that we wouldn't consider doing a fundal height measurement is, of course, when it's not indicated for raised BMI, fibroids. Of course, our high-risk ladies will already be having serial scans, but of course for twins, because that will not give you any idea of how each individual baby is growing. So, performing a fundal height measurement then. So, after examining the uterus, palpate with both hands to determine the fundus. Mum should be on a firm, flat surface at a 45-degree angle. Holding the tape measure at the fundus and running down the longitudinal axis with the centimetre measurement face down. So, ensuring that we're not biasing our measurements, that we've not already looked at the chart and what would be expecting it to be. We measure and we find exactly as it is. So measure to the top of the symphysis pubis and then measure and plot on your chart exactly as you'd find. There's no need to round a measurement up or down to the nearest whole centimetre. Whatever you find should be plotted. Often, staff will say to us that fundal height measurements are subjective, and if you're seeing different midwives, you'll have variation. And that is why the training does address this issue, and it's so important that we're all doing the same thing. An audit completed by one of our colleagues in New Zealand, who also used the GAP programme nationally, they looked at the midwives who were performing fundal height measurements and their accuracy pre and post training. And in fact, pre-training, only 49% of the measurements were actually within either side plus or minus 1 centimetre of the accurate measurement. And then when they repeated it after training, they actually found that it increased to 91% that were in the plus or minus of 1 centimetre. So it's a huge increase. And again, proving the importance of a simple tool that we can use and how the training has improved those measurements and that standardised technique. When women require scans and there's a lack of scans, this of course is a major concern. What we've seen is often that there are shortages because we're scanning the wrong women. And what we have seen in practice in some parts of, even in the UK, but other parts of the world, is that it's tempting for all of our low-risk women to do a one-off third trimester scan, even though it's perhaps not indicated. And this will be where we're using up lots of the scans that are not needed. We don't actually recommend a routine or a one-off third trimester scan, as there's no evidence for benefit, and that was concluded as well in a Cochrane review with 13 trials and over 34,000 women. And a recent large study in the Netherlands also found that in fact it had no benefit. But apart from it being ineffective and potentially using some of our precious scan slots for the women, it can also be fairly misleading, both for the clinician but also for the mother, and it can be dangerous. So here you can see a customised chart, and they've done a routine scan just before 13 weeks. This was a low-risk lady who didn't require an estimated fetal weight, but they carried on and did one anyway. When the mother later complained that she felt something wasn't right and she felt like the baby wasn't growing quite right, staff failed to act because actually they looked at the estimated fetal weight that had been done at 34 weeks and they were reassured. They were reassured themselves as clinicians, and they sent the mum home also feeling reassured because she'd recently had an estimated fetal weight. But sadly, that baby died at 39 weeks, and there was evidence there, as you can see, of fetal growth restriction. The weight of that baby when it was born was below the 3rd centile. So that is how that one-off third trimester scan can be unreassuring and falsely reassure women and clinicians. Whereas actually, if we monitor low-risk women with serial assessment of a standardised fundal height measurement, it works. This is the example of some serial plots on a customised chart that was adjusted for a mother in that pregnancy. And when there was a slowing of growth, there was a referral for an ultrasound scan. And when that ultrasound scan then was plotted on the chart, you could see that actually it fell below the 10th centile. The baby went on to be delivered and had a very low centile. And you can see in the top corner that the mother had proudly written on that chart it was a saved baby. Charts can be used to plot both fundal height measurements and estimated fetal weights. The customised charts are just for the maternal and physical characteristics. Firstly, the standard is optimised by excluding birth weights that have been affected by any form of pathology. So, diabetes, obesity, smoking, prematurity. So, we're looking for the optimal weight that baby should be without any of these pathologies. And secondly, then the customised charts are then accounted for using physiological variables for the mum. So, GROW stands for gestation-related optimal weight. And these are the same variables that kept coming up as significant in all of the populations that we study. So, the maternal height of the mother, the weight at the booking appointment or in early pregnancy, how many babies she's had before, and what that mum's ethnic origin is. And what's really nice about the parity is the number will affect the centile lines on the chart, but we also collect the details of the previous babies. So if the previous baby was born to be small, FGR, SGA, that will also highlight the chart. So then management plan can be made appropriately. So we're going to look at some referral recommendations, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands as to whether or not you think the next few slides are normal, what we would do. So fundal height measurement, would we think this is normal growth? Normal growth? Anyone be concerned by this and would want to do anything? The velocities? Good? Yes, brilliant. So the growth here is normal. We'd use the first plot. So that first plot that we've done at 28 weeks. I'm just going to see if I can get my laser pointer. Make life a bit easier. So the first plot there at 28 weeks is our baseline plot to assess subsequent measurements from, and this is a normal growth pattern that we'd be very happy with. What do we do when there is a first plot below the 10th centile for a fundal height measurement? What would you do in your practice today? Would you bring her back in a couple of weeks because fundal height measurement perhaps isn't accurate, or would you refer her for a scan? Scan. What's that right? Dating check. So when we've got the first plot under the 10th centile, our recommendations would be we'd refer this lady for a scan. So we'd presume that the dating is correct, and we would be not overly concerned. We don't want to tell the mother that we think her baby is small. We would say we're going to refer you for a second line of surveillance just to check what the baby's actual weight is. Explain that we are measuring the fundus, the uterus, and all of its contents, but we just want to be sure. And we would recommend that subsequent scans are within 72 hours or just over. If you can get scans within 72 hours, that is great, because obviously if this baby is compromised and the estimated fetal weight is below the 10th, we do want to keep a close eye on this pregnancy. Static growth. I don't think I need to ask what we do here. Of course, it's fairly evident that there is not a good growth trajectory between the last two plots. The growth has tailed off and we would here be concerned. So again, we would here refer for a scan and ensure that there was an estimated fetal weight done timely, so we could then go on and make further management plans. What about this one? What do you think to this? Are you reassured? Are you non-reassured? Would you want to see her back in a couple of weeks? Heard slow. Someone thinks it's slow. Is anyone happy with it? That they'll just send this mum away? Okay, general consensus then it's slow. Yeah, great, brilliant. So we can see that first plot at 28 weeks has started up on the 90th centile. Here we've got perhaps a little bit of variation where it could be that it's tailing off. And so I think the clinician here was absolutely right just to keep an eye. And this third one here has confirmed, in fact, that growth is tailing, because we'd expect to have kind of jumped back up here if it was just a bit of an anomaly. But you can see quite clearly it's not following the curves of the chart. And in fact, this is evidence of some slow growth. And this baby's perhaps getting tired, may need to think about perhaps doing some Dopplers, some estimated fetal weights, but following an SFH, a clinician for this would refer. How about this one? Think here. So we've gone from 2 that are following a normal trajectory, and then we've got an fundal height measurement above the 90th. Would we be concerned? Diabetes, yeah. Polyhydramnios, perhaps. So here we've got some excessive growth. This is not just simply having growth above the 90th centile, but it's a change in the pattern. So it's all about the trajectory and the pattern of growth. So for it to be described as accelerated or excessive, it's that change in the pattern. And so locally, you may discuss that you'd want to do an oral GTT. You may want to scan her, have a look at if there's any polyhydramnios, and do an estimated fetal weight as well, perhaps while you're there. But in terms of a normal growth trajectory, this wouldn't be classed as normal. How about this one? 2 questions. Is this normal growth? Yeah? Is everyone in agreement it's a normal growth trajectory? Yeah, brilliant. Next question, is it a big baby? Could be, brilliant. Could be. It's a fundal height measurement. It could be, or in fact, the estimated fetal weight could be down here. It's a normal growth trajectory. In the UK, what we often see with growth patterns like this is that perhaps nothing will be done, especially if the lady is already going to be delivering on an obstetric-led unit, because you have all the doctors, all the equipment that you need should this be, a 4.7 kilo baby. However, if the woman was perhaps choosing to deliver at home or in a midwifery-led unit that was perhaps miles and miles away in a rural location, the obstetrician at that point may consider doing an estimated fetal weight just to check that, in fact, we're not expecting a 4.7 kilo baby. So as Jason said, it isn't going to be all us. We're going to do some actual test papers. Pallavi has very kindly printed some test papers. So we're going to have a little go at working through the test papers and having a look. We're going to swap with our neighbour. So don't worry, it's not like a pass or fail. It's just to look at our own learning. We'll work through the questions together in about 10 or 15 minutes. Once you've all had a go, and then, of course, with some plotting and your subsequent management plans as well. Are we ready? Almost. Is the plotting the hardest bit? I did mine wrong. I had to cross it out and start again. Okie doke. So what's plotted on the left-hand axis of the customised growth chart? Did everyone have SFH? Great. What's plotted using the right-hand axis? Estimated fetal weight. List 3 of the requirements for an optimum fundal height measurement, not including consent and washing your hands, because that's cheating. Firm flat surface, 45-degree angle, empty bladder, paper tapes. Anyone have anything else? Start from the fundus. Highest point, yes, brilliant. Two-handed palpation. Yes, yeah, centimetres hidden. Well done. What gestation do you start fundal height measurements? You've been listening. I'm impressed. Is fundal height measurement appropriate for multiple pregnancies? Only for entertainment purposes only. When the fetus presents as a transverse lie, how would you measure the fundal height measurement? Yeah, normal, and if there's indication to refer, you'd continue to refer as you normally would. If there is some static growth at 39 weeks, would you explain to the mom it's probably due to descent of the head and see her again in a couple of weeks? Would you refer her for a scan as the fundal height should still continue to increase despite descent of the head? Would you see her again in another week and remeasure? Or would you refer to a consultant clinic and ask the doctor to recheck your measurement? The answer is we'd refer for a growth scan as the fundal height should still continue to increase despite descent of the head.
Can I just add there that some of these questions are, of course, for junior doctors and for midwives, but if you're a consultant, then you have to refer to yourself.
The number 7 then was the highest point of the fundus, A, B or C? Right. If we didn't know the anatomy of the uterus, we've got some problems, so marvellous. And number 8, the top of the symphysis pubis is D, E or F? Marvellous. Brilliant. Okie doke then. So chart number 9. 26 centimetres at 28 weeks and 2 days. Are we happy with that fundal height measurement? Do I hear no? Where does yours plot? Where does everyone else's plot? Everyone's plot's below the 10th? Below the 3rd? So we're going to refer for a scan. Marvellous. Next one again, fundal height measurements, number 10. What are we seeing there? Last 2, we're seeing some slowing of growth. So we're going to refer for a scan. Brilliant. Dopplers also. What, sorry? And then last but not least, we've got 4 fundal height measurements. What we're seeing from the fundal height measurements? Static growth. And from the estimated fetal weights, would you be concerned? Brilliant. Marvellous. So I hope that was helpful in just consolidating some of what we've already discussed this afternoon. We're now going to move on to look at the charts in a little more detail, how they change for different women. Because simply, it's evident, even from this room today, that one size just doesn't fit all. We couldn't all share the same shoes. We couldn't all share the same trousers because they wouldn't just simply fit all of us. One size doesn't fit all. Here we have Laura and Manjit, who were from our original research back in the 1990s, both clearly different sizes, heights, weights, and ethnicities. We've got another example here So we're going to look at some charts for these women a little bit more closely. So here we've got the term optimal weight predicted to be reached in a normal pregnancy for this mom who is slightly taller, slightly heavier and of European heritage. The term optimal weight at 40 weeks for this lady is 3,734 grams. Now, for the lady next to her, she has a much less of a steep curve here in the centile lines. This mom is shorter, lighter, and from a different ethnic background. These variations actually account for more than a 600-gram difference in the term optimal weight between the two mothers. What I'm going to do is just flick quickly between the two charts. What I want you to look at particularly are the centile lines towards the end of the pregnancy. And you can see for the short mother how they're much lower than they are for the taller mother. So you can see really quite significantly different charts for those two mums. If we use a chart that would be suitable for all small mums, then a estimated fetal weight at, say, 2.5 kilos at 37 weeks would be in normal limits and with absolutely no concern. But then for the big mother, if you use this chart, it will put the fetus at risk, and there's a bit of false reassurance there because we think that it was absolutely fine. But because her growth chart should actually have a much steeper centile lines that you can see here, the same 2.5 kilo weight at 37 weeks will actually fall below the normal limit for this mother. So you can see here fits very nicely on the 50th centile. The same weight and the same gestation for the taller, heavier mother actually sits below the 10th centile. And then action can be taken for a mom with the taller, heavier mom. Further investigation, perhaps Dopplers, or you'd even consider delivery. So if instead we use the big mother's charts for the smaller mom, the plot will then be low and then risk this pregnancy having to have to be delivered too early. Again, using the customised growth charts, the same fetal weight will display differently for each mother. For the mother on the left, the estimated fetal weight would be of concern. And for the mother of the right, we can reassure her that there is no need for unnecessary intervention. And this is just an example how the different charts will account for individual variation, but then goes on to influence the care and management that we provide for these women. Jason, over to you.
There's always been a fair bit of research to sort of test the adequacy of customized charts in terms of the appropriateness for determining which babies need further investigation and indeed delivery. And such evidence needs to be based on outcomes wherever possible. And there have been a number of them, and we'll sort of show you some of the more recent ones on our website that you can sort of download at your leisure and update yourself with the evidence that you might be looking for. These are really just some older original papers to sort of establish the fact that you really should not be applying one size for all. An interesting recent paper is from Canada near Melamed and in Kingston's Kingdom's unit, where they actually also looked at placental pathology and how customized centiles were better predicting which placenta was or was not diseased. And for validation, we've been collecting data sets from around the world, either for that country itself or for the ethnic origin group in that particular country to derive coefficients, which are in bold here on the left. And when we don't, then it becomes a regional coefficient. And of course, we have one also for India. But along the way, for example, several countries in Europe, Spain, Poland, Iran, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, we have systems whereby we can classify for individual ethnic groups in multi-ethnic populations. I thought I'll sort of focus on one more recent paper where we wanted to look at the stillbirth risk and smallness for gestation age, comparing different commonly used standards, Hadlock, Integral 21st, WHO, and comparing them with the GROW fetal weight standards. And look at maternal size as well as normal size with the normal limits and also in different BMI categories. And this paper looked at the sort of European origin ethnic groups as well as South Asian, and the results were essentially the same, so I'll focus on the cohort that looked at the South Asian mothers. And again, as I said, we had Hadlock, the Hadlock weight standard based on cross-sectional estimate of fetal weight data in a US cohort, I think 20-odd years, I think 30 years now. Integral 21st fetal growth standard based on longitudinal assessment of EFWs from low-risk populations in 8 countries. The World Health Organization fetal growth standard based on longitudinal assessment of EFWs from low-risk population in 10 countries. And then the gestation-related optimal weight, which is customized for maternal characteristics, as Emily said, height, weight, weight in early pregnancy, parity, and ethnic origin. So, as I said, focusing on the South Asian mothers, first of all, with normal BMI. And so we kept in normal BMI by dividing the mothers in the cohort into different height categories and weight categories along the same for each group, so that the BMI was the same in each category. So, as I warned you, this is interactive workshops like this, so therefore I need you to tell me what sort of plot, there are 2 axes here, stillbirth and smallness for gestation age, and we're looking for the association between these 2 for different size mothers using different standards, okay? But first of all, we need to know what the stillbirth rate is when you compare mothers of different heights and weight, all within normal BMI. So bigger and bigger mothers. Oh, please don't all speak at once. I think, what sort of graph should I be getting? Is it going this way, around the circle, or stillbirth rates? With conference on stillbirths, tall mothers, short mothers, medium-sized mothers. I assume you might not know. Sorry? What would it look like? A straight line? Any other offers? Sorry? Anybody think it's going down? Going up? A V? Actually, it is more or less a straight line. And there's a bit of a dip, which is not statistically significant. Maybe the data set was not big enough to detect that. I don't think there is really much in it. So, for all intents and purposes, you're right. It is essentially a straight line. Okay, so now we have the different groups of the one-size-fits-all standards. And what do you think they would do when you look at the SGA rate? Have I got a pointer? Oops. They're all going down, which shows that a one-size-fits-all standard is not correct when you have a multi-faceted population. Mothers come in different heights and weights, different sizes. Taking out BMI as a risk factor, which I'll deal with in a minute, then normal heights and weights in the sense of having normal BMI. And so therefore, each of these standards, be that, oops, not doing very well with this. Each of these standards show a, I think I lost the laser pointer. There we go. Each of these standards, be that here the one for Hadlock, which is this one here, for short mothers, it suggests there's a high rate of SGA, and for tall mothers, it is a low risk of SGA, low rate of SGA. The same for intergrowth, and the same for WHO. Intergrowth happens to be quite low all the way through, low rates in most populations. And so you see that these do not reflect the trend across these height categories. And we have this as a stats, the population average standard Z-test for trend is significantly different from the trend of stillbirth rates. So if you want to have a standard that reflects SGA associated with pathology, you won't get it with any of these standards. In fact, they cause a lot of false positives in small mothers and false negatives in large mothers. Whereas the customized chart being adjusted for individual variation takes this into account and has a trend in SGA rates which reflects the stillbirth trend. And this is what we want. And so here the Z-test for trend is not significant. In other words, these two, the stillbirth and the SGA rate, are similar. And therefore, verifying in this sense the association between a customized SGA and stillbirth risk. Okay, I might have inadvertently already shown the result of this, but I'll try anyway. What happens if we're now looking at an increasing BMI across these categories? Stillbirth risk. If you saw the slide, try to unsee it. Sorry? It will go up? It'll have a U shape, a V? Any other offers? Yes? Well, actually, you're absolutely right, it goes up, but you're also right that it can go as a V shape because in the European population cohort, I don't have the slide here, it actually was a little bit higher there for less than 18.5 mothers, whether or not that reflects malnutrition or associated with a different socioeconomic group or whatever else. What is interesting here is that it didn't do so in the South Asian population, And there may be an argument that the limits that we use for BMI should be different for South Asian populations. There have been some publications on that, and even a WHO recommendation of starting it a bit earlier. There are different suggestions, but maybe just down to 18 or even less than that. So, but that's the main thing. Now, you would think that a standard for determining SGA should again try to reflect this. And this is what we get from the different standards. In each one of them, once again, they show the bigger the mother, the lower the SGA rate, suggesting that big mothers have less SGA, which is true if you just use SGA in terms of like one size fits all, but they are relatively small for them, and that is not being picked up. The SGA rate is not picked up. And when you customize, you can see that once again, the customized standard reflects this sort of movement, a little bit of increase here again, as I mentioned, so slightly higher SGA rate in the low BMI mothers, but that's not statistically significant. What is significant is that once again, one size fits all population average standards, be that WHO, Hadlock, or intergrowth, do not reflect stillbirth risk. So therefore, if you have a high BMI mother, she will have an increased risk of SGA that is not being detected. Yeah. Yes.
Trajectory we are looking.
Yes.
Of the growth.
Yes.
So how would it matter whether it is a mother who is high BMI or low BMI? Do you think it will make a difference?
Well, if the trajectory means that you are regularly every 2 to 3 weeks doing measurements, then you're absolutely right. As long as you know what the trajectory should be,
exactly,
and what the end point should be for your population, then you can rely on that rather than saying what exactly the size. So this is just the size at particular points in pregnancy.
Right.
But in reality, we do not have information all the way through pregnancy, especially in low-risk mothers. And so therefore, if there is risk, you would want to actually do serial scanning, and that allows for the velocity aspect to come into it, which I'll talk about tomorrow. But in terms of assessing the fetal weight when there is a measurement at, let's say, 36 weeks, and you haven't seen that mother for some weeks,
then of course,
the question is, what are you going to do? Is this okay for this mother or not? Are you tempted to deliver in a week's time? Or are you happy to continue until she goes into labor spontaneously and deliver a normal baby?
So absolute centile might make a difference. I'm saying which centile is she falling in less than 10th centile, or maybe between 10th and 50th centile. Yeah. So that could be variable in case we have one value.
Yeah.
That's right. And one more.
But can I just re-emphasize what you're saying? Serial assessment trumps at any point the one-off meurement antenatally. But in reality, we do not have as much information as Emily was showing all the way through.
Thank you.
And as she showed, when that was in the sort of on the large above the 90th centile, everybody agreed that's okay growth because it continues in a sort of trajectory that is reassuring.
Thank you.
Okay, I think, are there any other questions about this? This concept is applied now to pathology, which regrettably is becoming more and more common, the high BMI mother, who poses lots of challenges. Even we could go on about the challenges of getting the ultrasound measurement correct in high BMI. So therefore, these are these mothers who are carrying a baby that is at increased risk. And if you're measuring, if you're assessing them with the wrong standard, you will miss it. Because the standard will tell you that baby is okay because we use the same standard for everybody. Whereas a customized standard will say that that baby should be bigger, and it's not. And that's the concept of better reassurance when everything is okay, and better detection of risk factors when they're not. Sorry?
Sorry, had one more query. That we are talking of BMIs now, but we are all aware that a symphysiofundal height measurement in a high BMI woman would have its own challenges.
Yes.
So when we are talking about high BMI, are we referring to the symphysiofundal height or to the...
No, we talk about, we should have made it clearer, we're talking about estimated fetal weight only. And we do have a cutoff, a somewhat arbitrary cutoff for when to not rely on fundal height measurement. If you require serial monitoring of fetal growth, then to refer to ultrasound. And that ideally should be from 30, but practically in the National Health Service, it is from 35, BMI 35. What is it in your practice? Oh, maybe I should have asked another question. Do you use fundal height measurement? Okay, that's... No, but I'm still waiting for the answer of one question, excuse me. So do you use fundal height measurement? Yes. So what is your cutoff point from not relying on fundal height measurement and going on to scans? Because the point has been made, it's a good one, is that, you know, this really relates to antenatally estimated fetal weight, and postnatal, of course, the birth weight. So what cutoff would you say that this mother requires? Or is it just by the appearance? Okay. What? BMI 30? Okay. Well, that would be our ideal, and in a South Asian and Indian population, I would recommend it should be 30 and not higher.
So my question was that, you know, one practical problem which we, face while taking symphysiofundal height is that when we palpate the pubic symphysis, maybe our women are dressed in such a way that there is a challenge palpating the upper border of the pubic symphysis, and it is little tender. And so they do have a bit of pain when we press and try and find out where the pubic symphysis is. I'm saying, is there any way we can resolve that problem?
Okay. Well, I don't know whether we don't observe that very much. Is it the lightness of touch or
could be. No, I'm saying to palpate that, maybe if it is, patients who are little, overweight or, there's fat on the pubic symphysis. Or maybe they dress up so well because, we don't kind of remove the lower and they have their, clothes in between. But we do find that problem. I'm saying that is a general problem, yeah.
But the other thing that we cannot emphasize enough is that even when we started this, and still today, we see midwives and doctors who are sort of looking at the gestational age and what the measurement is and say that it is okay because it represents that to perhaps some God-given equation that gestation age equals centimeters. And please, don't use that. And anybody you meet, any colleagues, suggest to them not to use it as well.
And can I add?
Sorry?
Yes, and can I add?
Yeah. Sorry. Really blinded by the lights.
I was short standing, but I'm not visible sitting also. Yeah, I'm having a lot of problem with my height. They have removed that, so sometimes I'm becoming short and sometimes I'm becoming very tall.
Do you want it over there, perhaps?
I like it. I do agree that it is very tender. So I tell them, can you show me where the bone is? Very nicely, they will show me this. I don't know, but it is very helpful. And then when you press, you are anyway confirming. But for us to palpate and go over there, maybe it. Yes, but it hurts.
Okay, so
Imagine for short people.
so while we're talking about serial ultrasound biometry, to emphasize that it is important and is important to be done serially, not just what Emily showed in terms of the one-off measurements in low risk or even in high risk pregnancy, needs to be done serially so that the trajectory of growth is known. And the risk factors, I mean, you will, I'm sure, define them yourself in your practice, but clearly they include high body mass index, smoking, alcohol, and drugs, social factors, and late booking, because with late booking, you do not have a starting point. So therefore, you have to rely even more on the trajectory from then on to make sure that it's growing, rather than a one-off measurement that could be anywhere on the graph because you do not know where the starting point is. And the medical history, and there are just some of them mentioned here: hypertension, diabetes, SLE, APLS, obstetric history, including stillbirths, preterm delivery, SGA, FGR in the past, current pregnancy, and Pape congenital by APH, and so on. So then the question we often get asked, when to do it? And currently, the National Health Service, because it is so broken, I'm sure you've heard all about it, and because of this chronic shortage of ultrasound resource, they would say 3 weekly from 31 weeks onwards. We think they should start earlier, 28 weeks, and to have 4 scans like this all the way through up to 37. Some people would even want to make sure that that the last scan should be even later to try to detect late onset growth restriction. But that for us would be the recommended frequency. What happens if you don't do it? What happens if you don't do it as a, and there hasn't really been that many studies to compare that, and maybe prospectively it might not even be ethical to do so. So we looked at a large data set which is still being published based on 1.3 million births in 119 UK hospitals. And we first of all looked at what the overall stillbirth rate was back then, and the low risk versus high risk as defined in the sort of algorithm had different stillbirth rates, higher obviously in the high risk population. But then if the high risk had serial scans, then if anything, the risk was lower. But if they didn't have serial scans, the risk of stillbirth was twice as high. So it is a really strong argument for making sure that, first of all, that you do a proper risk assessment at the beginning of pregnancy, and then act accordingly in terms of your plan, your care pathway. I won't talk about biophysical assessment and Doppler. You could have a separate conference on that, of course. But obviously, we all know that it has an important role, especially after the scan has suggested that there are some problems in fetal growth. And then, of course, monitoring performance, including the rate of antenatal detection of SGA as a key performance indicator. It's really important that you yourself learn whether or not your practice is up to the standard that you want it to have. Because if you don't assess it by looking at the outcome and say what has happened and Emily will be talking later in the conference also about the near misses and the importance of looking at cases where SGA was missed but the baby was fine. These are important elements of proper growth assessment. So when we first start and implement the GAP program in the unit, we always are very keen to get an idea of what the baseline detection rate is. And it's usually between 15 and 20%, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a bit lower. Again, they didn't complain. It starts at about, see if we put that there, I can't use the mouse. And starting from that point, then what happens after the implementation of the GAP program and the growth charts, it jumps up to about at least twice as much. And these are then the average for the GAP units in the UK. Around about 40-odd%. And then we also calculate a top 10 of the best GAP units to show the others that it can be better. And it's linked with the amount of training, the amount of adherence to protocols, but also the amount of reviewing the cases, reporting on your detection rate, monitoring it, seeing what can be done differently, and doing the near-miss case analysis. This here was really just a dip when clinics stopped during the height of the pandemic. This high, I mean, for us, for the UK, this is a high detection rate, but I know the ones from the Fernandez hospital, and I think these can be exceeded even further, and I'm very pleased to see how well they're doing there with detection rates, and that is being monitored. And I'll show you some slides about that a little bit later. And then that was less than 10 centile. We're also looking at less than third centile. And you can see here there's an average and the top 10, which is then reaching further heights. And that is good to see. So then comes the audit, and that's where I hand back over to Emily, because audit and the training of doing the audit is a really very important element of the GAP program.
Okie doke. So, as part of the Grow app, which is the application to create the customised charts for the women, once the women have then delivered their baby, you can go into the same Grow app and enter the birth details of the baby. The idea of the birth details for the baby is first to get a customised centile to know and plan postnatal management for that baby, but also the questions that will be answered on referral and detection. Antenatally, was there a referral from a fundal height measurement with concern? And antenatally, was there a estimated fetal weight below the 10th centile? From answering those two questions, they will then feed into some reports, particularly for that hospital or that kind of group of hospitals. We issue regular reports to units so they can monitor their own rates, and then they can benchmark their progress. So here is an example of one of the sites in the UK, looking particularly here at below the 10th centile. You can see that they here have got a very respectable, almost 65% detection rate. They can also monitor their false positives, which is really helpful for them to look at. They can compare to see how they're doing against the national average. So that's all of the GAP units in the UK grouped together. So they can see that they're performing better than the average. But they can also see where they are sitting within the top 10. And the top 10 average is around 61. So this site will know that they are in the top 10 of SGA detection in the UK. But as part of the GAP programme, we also provide a tool for our clinicians for a structured review of SGA births that were not identified antenatally to understand why these small babies were missed, ensuring that in fact lessons are learnt and improvements can be made where they're needed. So the users answer a series of questions that will then be presented with taxonomies for each case. So you're able then to provide actions to move forward. GAP score, you can look at single cases. So you can look at a single case and realise why this one perhaps was missed. And you might from there identify training issues for individual clinicians. But overall, you can get a bit of an aerial view by submitting more cases to see what the overall system failures or the themes are, being able then to focus the service provision and provide evidence for commissioning support and services. So as a proposal, a minimum of 30 cases is required to be entered to get that aerial view and that aggregated report. This, of course, is dependent on the size of the hospital. So if a unit had got 6,000 deliveries, we'd expect more cases to be entered. So it's reflective upon the care that they're providing for their population. And then what they're able to do is identify a local audit team who then collects these missed cases, enter them into the system, and then every 6 months or so, they'll contact us for an aggregated report, so then we can feed back to them the findings of all of those cases. So here's an example of one of the reports that we would feed back to a trust. Here is an example report, and the trust entered 111 cases of missed SGA. So the first table you can see breaks down the risk factors of the mothers at booking, and you can see that there are 3 largest categories for this audit that appear. So we've got a smoker. So remembering again that these were missed cases of SGA, but many of them were already high risk at booking. So there's already a learning point even from the get-go. So here we've got the large categories being smoker, a previous small baby, so you can think that perhaps we should have expected another small baby, and also the raised BMI. These were perhaps women who weren't monitored appropriately and continued to have fundal height measurements when they should have had estimated fetal weights. And again, just to reiterate, these were all missed cases, meaning over half of the missed cases actually had a risk factor at booking for SGA, accounting for 53% of their missed babies. In the aggregated report, users are kind of presented with 3 of the top reoccurring themes for the cases that they've entered into that report. Here you can see that there was inappropriate management, a failure to act upon findings. The second one was the deviation from guidance, so they didn't follow the national guidance. And the final one is the incorrect management following those abnormal findings. And in many instances, these actually don't just relate to individual errors, but these are system errors that need to be addressed. The software also helps provide a list of taxonomies that will automatically populate depending on the responses that the user has given in the routine questions throughout the tool. You can see some of them here. So the tool is exactly the same for all of the cases entered. You cover maternal summary, any fundal height measurements, were they plotted correctly? Was there a referral from abnormal growth? Again, the same for growth scan. Was it plotted and was it plotted correctly? We often found in the UK that particularly midwives, we weren't very good at plotting, and I demonstrated it earlier by getting one wrong and having to start again. And so that became a main theme that we were seeing in some of the reports in the UK. The birth details. This was really interesting when you aggregate the data to see how many of your missed cases actually ended up with an emergency caesarean section, or perhaps then ended up on the neonatal unit requiring some intensive care. And importantly, the software encourages the team to agree and record an action plan. And so you've got your final tab there, which is your action plans. In this case, it was just for additional focus training for the clinicians, but they will obviously vary depending on the taxonomy that has been raised. So what effect did all of this have on stillbirth rates? We saw a year-on-year reduction, overall 28% compared to the 10 years previous, resulting in actually 1,000 fewer baby deaths a year. And that is why we are here this weekend, to reduce those stillbirth numbers. During the pandemic, we did see it spike a little, but now reassuringly it's began to come down again. We continue to await 2023 data. We're expecting that later in September, I believe. But actually our gap data does suggest that this downward trend is actually continuing. But what we wanted to know is actually how much of this was due to the GAP programme. And so we decided to look at the Office of National Statistics data, and this was published by our statistician, Oliver. So we wanted to compare the stillbirth rates, firstly in non-GAP sites and in GAP units. So we display each of the English regions as partial and complete implementers, depending on whether or not they do the audit and follow the full protocol. So we grouped all the hospitals in England into 4 categories: those that weren't in GAP, those that were in GAP but only partially implemented, those that were in GAP and followed it completely and followed the protocol, and those in GAP who had got the top 10 detection rates. So we first looked at the background trend on a 3-year moving average for the hospitals that weren't in GAP, and there was an overall decline in stillbirth rates anyway. We put this down to the increased awareness over the last 10 years or so of the RCOG guidance in 2013 on risk assessment, and the recommendations then of serial scanning and the delivery of SGA babies at term. Units that had complete GAP actually significantly had a steeper downward curve that you can see here. And then the units with the best antenatal SGA detection rate had an even steeper decline still, which suggested a dose-dependent relationship. The GAP programme is used in centres across the world, including one centre here in India. And India is aware of course, it's one of its highest stillbirth rates in the world, and which is what brings us all together at this conference. Some of our other international sites across the world include New Zealand, which has a national programme where all mothers in the country are cared for using customised growth charts. We've got a big independent body of midwives who use customised growth charts in Germany, and in fact it's the midwives who are pushing the obstetricians to take on customised growth charts. We've got centres over in the UAE, we've got centres in Pakistan, in Nigeria, so GAP is certainly spreading now across the world.
We in all these units, there is informal feedback that their practice is improving. Certainly in New Zealand, there has been a significant improvement in antenatal detection, and the same in Abu Dhabi. But I wanted to sort of highlight in particular the results actually of a sort of very fruitful collaboration, but also local initiative here at the Fernandez Hospital, led by Dr. Nuzat, and also with Dr. Pallavi. They took on this program in a very, very competent and enthusiastic and motivated manner. This was published in the Journal of Perinatal Medicine in 2022, and I just want to briefly sort of outline what was quite clear evaluation of something, of how it can be done and what positive effect it can have. So they compared it with the detection rates with before the study, and this was the period of implementation. There's lots of learning points here, because it is true that there is the need for training, but also for the general way in which clinicians tend to be conservative in carrying on, but the need to sort of for something to embed itself into everyday practice. And that was during this period. And then after that, you can see that the antenatal detection rate that Emily was pointing out is such an important evaluator of the quality of antenatal care, increased significantly. But more importantly, how about the outcomes? And this study was large enough during this period to look at outcomes, and focusing on the term stillbirths, you could see that there was a significant reduction compared to pre-gap to the post-gap from 0.37 relative risk. In addition, there was reduced perinatal complications, which included fewer admissions to neonatal intensive care and a reduced rate of neonatal encephalopathy. So this really sort of highlights the power that is not straightforward, but the power that a properly implemented program can have. Nuzhat, would you like to add to this? And please, if you want to stand up, I'll give you this little stool. Okay, why don't you come up here, please?
Thank you, Jason, for making me taller. But what was very important in this entire exercise is we had a very massive reduction in our term stillbirths. And that was previously, if we take a look 10 years back or 15 years back, we would have bereavement counseling or looking after a baby which is stillborn at term is actually very, very difficult for anyone. Today, in current times, we hardly find any term stillbirths. Very rare to have term stillbirths at Fernandez. And I totally believe that it is intensive training, audits, making sure whenever we miss, we go back and see why did we miss. And we did have a very significant reduction in term stillbirths, and that's why this has come. But what we felt with COVID was it went back, term stillbirths increased in COVID times, and this year we are trying to get it back to normal. You can use my stool.
Having not necessarily FGR. So that
Yes.
would not have decreased by doing this, or did it make difference to that also? Like hypertension, like when you're looking at high risk, not necessarily they would be fetal growth restricted, but we would detect hypertension and we would detect other things.
So protocol-based care, I think the credit goes to Dr. Tara way back in 2011. So Fernandez follows protocols to a pretty good extent, even though we are 120 doctors working together. We follow it very nicely. And hypertension, diabetes, we managed to get down our stillbirth rate very nicely in these groups, which are the major killers. Our main problem was not detecting fetal growth restriction. See, our journey is not now. It has been a long journey which has come down slowly and slowly. So, if we take a look at the diabetes guidelines, which came from NICE or the Green Top guidelines, they came in 2011 or 2010. So, we did change. And then when IID PhD guidelines came, we did change. So, that change was constant. And our stillbirth rates in diabetes is very low. In type 1, type 2, because, we know when to deliver, we know how to do the surveillance. The problem was in not identifying. Because I remember in 2014 when I went, he asked me a question, what is your SGR detection rates? And I had no idea. And I thought, what is that indicator? And, when we came back, I remember telling Pallavi and Pratibha were there. I'm not sure if Pratibha, I was asked this question and I really don't know. And when we did, we stood at 45 to 49%. And actually, it was a very, I felt very ashamed that we put our hand on that woman to be able to identify only one aspect of care. That is the baby growing well? And how can we that, we think our antenatal care is good and we are not able to identify? And that's where the journey began, because symphysis fundal height also takes a little time for you to become better at it. And as Dr. Manju said, you can use any chart. But Dr. Manju, I want to add in to that question. When you do, this is a screening tool. So the trend will definitely tell you it's going down or up. Then you get an estimated fetal weight. When you put that plot, the chart matters. Your scale matters. When are you going to call it as less than 10 centile? So if the scale says that it is appropriate, you say please go home, and she comes back at 39 with an IUFT. And later on, if you use the same scale, it will come as AGA. But if you use another scale, it will come as SGA. So when, as part of my evaluation of stillbirths, because I did PNM for a long, long time, I would do the plotting of that woman's, birth weight of that stillborn by fetal WHO, by Hadlock, that is the ultrasound one, and then Jason's customized centiles were free at that time. Go on to that. Now also you can do birth weight centiles free of cost, and go across and see, and suddenly realize tall women, obese women we don't identify them very well for them, and obesity is increasing in India. So I asked Dr. Tamkin, can I use, is it okay if I say that my baby and Dr. Tamkin's baby cannot be the same? Thank you.
Ma'am, it's not a query, more of a suggestion. So we saw the success of CAP in India, like in Fernandez, and also we like Emily was mentioning about the national program in New Zealand. So can we anticipate such? Can we implement this as a national program in India? If so, what are the anticipated barriers that we could look
Put
into,
it in.
and what are the steps that we have to do in order to make it like or implement it in public sector?
So, very good question, because that's where it's going to make a difference. If we individuals start putting it in a small area, it's not going to make a difference. The difference is going to come, it has got to be on a large scale and in a major place where stillbirths occur. Now, what is very important for all of us to understand is that people think if you get the chart and I use the chart and it's going to go down, it will never go down. It's very, very important that if I use an appropriate ultrasound weight standards, or if I get ultrasound done, or if I use a chart, it is not only a chart. That should be very clear to everyone. It starts from risk assessment. It starts from streamlining to not wasting our ultrasound resources for low risk population, but putting it on to a high risk population, doing them as they are supposed to be done, identifying the cutoffs very comfortably, that is using the right scale. When we say the right scale, that's where the customization will come. But then, checking whether you were good with your SGA detection rates. If you do not audit your SGA detection rates, how do you know? I have to tell you of my journey. It's not easy to bring about a change in a hospital like Fernandez also. So you put it up, and then some of the consultants or some of the units would not use it very nicely, and some of them. So then at some point we did a consultants SGA detection rates. I'm sorry, we did not reveal the names. Consultant 1, consultant 2, consultant 3, consultant 4. And the highest consultant detection rates belongs to Dr. Tara. Anyone who does high risk pregnancies always has that in mind, that maybe I will have an SGA baby. Those who do low risk pregnancies think nothing is going to go wrong, everything will be fine. That is where the big error comes in. And I have, my rates have never gone beyond Dr. Tara. I'm always second to her. It has always been. She looks after a very high number of very sick mothers. So your thought is, in pregnancy she has come to you for only one purpose. So your thought is, detecting SGA is your main reason. In other low risk population, she looks fine, her BP is fine, she's been doing fine. Why should I have an SGA in that? And that's where the problem occurs. So gap is not only one scale. Many people mistake this and then say, we use the chart, but nothing happened. Then review your SGA, missed SGA cases. We would go back to the team and say, we would do it anonymously, but the person who missed it, I'm sure they know that it's their case that they are talking about. We only want them to know. And sometimes when they wouldn't come for 2-3 times, we would give them a message saying that, can you please be there? We have to use our ways of getting everyone. After some time, people will realize that if we don't do this, then my rates are not going to be good. Then units having higher stillbirths versus others, this is healthy competition, but we have to improve. Absolutely.
Which was raised that, can we roll out in India? So what I feel is that even the group of people we are here, and say if we start with it, and say it's fine, we talk about all over the country, but each one of us can make a difference in our own institution. And let's start with this indicator and let's roll out the gap protocol. I think that's what is desirable, no? And then it can move on. We can increase our circles of influence and move on. That is what I feel, yeah.
Dr. Manju also told me that you did not answer the question. Okay, so, but it is true. Every aspect of this care can be done in a public institution, Chatra. There is nothing that cannot be done. What is missing here is the scale. And I'm sure I asked Jason to release the Indian growth chart. I said, and he's going to do that. I'm making the announcement before you. You come here and you don't give. So he is going to release the Indian growth chart. All right, so a big thank you. But we want you to go back and including this part of it, we have to add in 1, 2, 3, 4 points and then move across to audit your stillbirths. When SGA stillbirths come, you have to get together as a team and say that why is it happening despite putting on a protocol. I suppose that's the most important one. Would you like to add something?
Can I?
I will see. I get the privilege. So the annual subscription for getting the Indian growth chart is priced at 8,000 rupees per annum, which would be just less than 1,000 rupees per month for you. So if you can give your names across over here, we will get the access. You get a user login ID as well as a password from the Perinatal Institute, and you enter that, and then you can create your charts very comfortably. The certification of the entire gap has been done for you as part of the workshop, and that only gap which was there in the entire protocol that we are following today would be filled up by this. So just at the Fernandez stall, if you give your number saying we want to enroll for gap, we would do it for you.
Can I?
Your mic.
Testing. If there's a national program, and hopefully perhaps this conference could make some steps towards that, the importance is to realize that there's something you can do about stillbirth. There's lots of things we can do about it, but there's something practical that has already been proven, not just internationally, but also in India, thanks to this study. And so if there is enough national will to roll this out as a coordinated program, of course, we would be very pleased to support it. Interestingly, we showed you some of the challenges in terms of detection rates during the COVID pandemic. One of the benefits that everybody recognizes since COVID was that people become much more au fait with remote teaching, training, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, etc. And that's how we've been able to put far away groups together. Whole of New Zealand, for example, it's a small country. India is a very big country, but it is something that can be done with local champions, such as the ones we have here. And there are people interested from lots of other places already, and they've been writing to us, and we'd be very pleased to support it and to support local champions to make it a national program. We do have to charge for the charge, regrettably, but it's essentially, based on just recovering costs. And together with that comes training, as well as the ability to have audit tools to assess your own practice, because we're very keen on that being part and parcel of the program, not just the charts, but their appropriate application. Sorry, you wanted to have
one practical point which I faced when I started 20 years back doing a fundal, serial fundal. The thing was that in a busy practitioner with 60, 70 patients to be seen in few hours. So there what happens, sometimes to misplace the tape, measuring tape. So what we have started is like, we have attached this tape on the table so that it can be easily taken out. So this is a simple way, so that really, I'll show you the photographs later. So it is a simple way to modify our techniques so that this becomes an easier task. Otherwise, when I suggested it to one of our corporate hospitals in Bombay, they said that it is impossible to take these measurements. In Bombay, all the municipal hospitals, they are not doing it. And I suggested I am benefited in last 20 years. The stillbirth rate has gone down because of these serial estimations.
The foot end of the table.
Yeah, please, I'll show you the foot.
Not the head end.
But
I like the idea. What we do is, it's such a big one. So what we do, we roll half of it and put at 50 centimeters, we put a gum tape so that it's not big and we have 50 only available. But but this is good. Otherwise, you have to search which is 100 and which is 1. So we have one end only to use. But thank you so much.
We used to give out these reusable ones, but now, of course, they should be single use. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we just developed a new chart, which in fact immediately says Grow India. So the Grow Chart India. So therefore it's already calibrated. And at the same time, if you've got a busy practice and you feel that you don't need to correct for all the variables every time because this mother is really just average size and all that, the ethnicity is already preloaded, of course, together with others if you have a multi-ethnic patient population, for example, but it sort of sticks on the main one. And if you've got a busy practice, then there's less work to actually produce an individually customized. So it can be customized to the variables that you feel are important, and to sort of, if you have a busy practice. So we're quite proud of this one. This is part of this release that we're talking about, and this is new. It has only just sort of come out in the last few weeks, and we're similarly supplying country-specific charts in other parts of the world as well. So you're very welcome to it if that's something that you feel would, I hope at the end of this session, would improve, you think it would improve your practice.
But thank you so much for doing it, because the main problem, sometimes the height is not taken. Sometimes the weight is not taken. Sometimes the parity is not. And then people say, we can't create a chart. So I asked Jason that if nothing is available, also the background should be Indian ethnicity. You add in the mother's weight and height, it becomes, physical characteristics. You add parity, then it becomes much more, and then you get this. So I am absolutely delighted that you did it for us. And he did it only for this conference. So that we did. Thank you so much.
Okie doke then. So we've spoke about perinatal charts India, which I'll come back to. But there are some new methods and technology that are now available to us. One is to assess the growth trajectory in particular. And here we have the growth rate calculator, which is freely available to our clinicians. So the idea of the growth rate calculator is to enter 2 scans, the details of the scans including the gestation and the estimated fetal weight. The user will then click calculate, and then they're able to view the results. So when we look at the results, you can see that the interval between the scans, so in this case 23 days, is calculated. The weight gain per week in grams, so the weight gain per week in grams between these two measurements was 67 grams per week. And then using the power calculation, which is projected optimal weight range, the expected estimated fetal weight here, and then the range for it to be normal and sit within the normal range is visible here. So in fact, based on the data that we've entered, you can see that the calculation has shown that the growth between these two estimated fetal weights is in fact slow. So currently using the customized growth charts, assessing trajectory and the velocity in growth is very subjective. What you perhaps may call slow, I may call normal. So the growth rate calculator can really assist with the measurements and assessing whether it's normal, if it's close to the range, or whether or not it's in fact slow growth. It's available for both estimated fetal weight and fundal height measurements, so it can be used by midwifery colleagues as well. The power method has been published, and Professor Gardosi will be covering this in more detail in tomorrow's session. And as I say, it's available to our clinicians. But in the meantime, we've been really quite busy working on the new software, which is Grow 2.0. This is, it has the following functionality. So it's fully electronic. It has over 120 ethnic or country of origin groups. It assists with risk assessment throughout pregnancy. Mothers have an app that they can view their chart themselves. It auto plots the estimated fetal weight and the fundal height measurements for you. It's able, using that power calculation, to identify to the user slow and accelerated growth. You're able to plot twins on there, and it calculates that twin discordance. And it also has embedded with it the gap score tool, so it automates that growth surveillance for you. So Grow 2.0 was launched in the UK of November 2021, and then across New Zealand in November of 2023. So to introduce Grow 2.0, the first significant change is removing the limitations that we had in paper. So in our legacy system, we were supporting users only with paper, whereas the 2.0, it's now electronic. It can be shared easily between users without having to have to physically see them. It can be reviewed elsewhere by other clinicians. And there's the app, as I say, for the mothers, ensuring that moms still stay at the centre of the care and they're still involved in the care that's provided. Currently, using a paper chart, if any errors are made to the maternal demographic details or the characteristics that might affect the centile lines on the chart, then the clinician has no choice but to recreate a new chart, making sure it's accurate. Whereas Grow 2.0, because it's electronic, you can go in, make the amendments that you require, continuing care on the same chart without having to have to recreate it and plot all the measurements again. And what's been identified from many of the missed cases of SGA that we've looked at is that plotting estimated fetal weight and fundal height measurement is often incorrect. These inaccuracies then, in some cases, lead to the missed opportunities to refer or even then plan an early delivery. So Grow 2.0 eliminates this risk of inaccurate plotting and means the set square that we encourage people to use when plotting on paper can firmly stay at home. Grow charts in the paper format relies again on that clinical interpretation. Learning from missed cases suggests that on occasions clinicians actually miss those abnormal plots and those abnormal measurements, and they don't go on to refer for further surveillance. Grow 2.0 will alert the user if it's SGA or if it's LGA. Similarly, with growth velocity, there are occasions abnormal growth patterns are missed, and Grow 2.0 has embedded the growth velocity tool, which supports clinical decision making and aids the clinician by drawing attention to concerning patterns for both fundal height measurement and estimated fetal weights. The current paper charts work entirely in silo and rely on the clinician to embed the growth chart into an overall fetal growth risk assessment. Grow 2.0, as part of the workflow, prompts early risk assessment to document what those risks are, and then subsequent risk assessment throughout pregnancy in case anything has changed. Therefore, making it a fetal growth module rather than just a single chart. Grow 2.0 will auto-populate the birth weight centile questions, and those are the questions that feed into your referral and detection rates. So again, alleviating some of the responsibility to the clinician who is in attendance at birth. And then finally, as our colleagues at Fernandez will well know, the process of reviewing the missed cases will often mean sometimes a bit of a note trawl. Grow 2.0, because all of the information is held electronically in one place, it then is able to populate the gap score audit tool for you. So it lifts that burden of audit, also meaning that you can then audit many more cases. So just a little bit of what Grow 2.0 looks like and some of the functionality. So it will alert the user to the risk factors or measurements that perhaps may be of concern. Here you can see on the top left here where we've got what we call an alert flower. This is our alert flower here, and we've got mom in the centre. We have medical risk factors, we have social risk factors, obstetric, bereavement, and any current risk factors. So the highlighted petals, which are the ones in red, alerts the user that there are risks belonging to this mother that need to be taken into consideration. Here we've got a medical risk factor because the BMI is above 35, and an obstetric risk factor because she's had a previous small baby. Some of this information is collected as you work through the workflow. So, for instance, the previous small baby will auto-populate because it will take into consideration the previous baby details that you've entered. But some of them you may choose to select yourself. So, for instance, if mum is a smoker, you can complete those at the risk assessment. And then the example here on the bottom right, this will alert the user to any measurements that may perhaps cause concern. So you can see here it's showing as a red plot. Upon closer inspection, the tooltip here on the left shows the user clearly that although the centile is 21, so you can see here the estimated fetal weight, 2250 grams, sits on the 21st centile, and it's well above the 10th centile, but what the concern for it to be red is it's showing us that there's some slow growth. So it's comparing the growth velocity from the measurement before at 31 weeks. It's fell out of that expected range. So now it's telling us that the growth is slow, and that's why that plot appears to be red. The centile is really quite useful when measurements are perhaps close to the 10th or close to the 3rd centile, because then it gives us the extra information that we need to be able to plan the ongoing management and perhaps delivery. The app has the ability to plot twin 1 and twin 2 on the same chart, and you can see there's a little 1 next to the one twin and a little 2 next to the other, so you can clearly identify the twins. Upon opening the tooltips, again, there is a wealth of knowledge. Firstly, assessing the centiles for each of those twins. So we've got twin 1 here at 31 weeks that sits on the 71st centile. And we've got twin 2 at the same gestation that sits on the 24th centile. But also what it's able to do is it calculates for us the discordance between the babies. So you can see here the twin discordance is 12.9%. We're continuing to add more and more functionality to Grow 2.0, and most recently we've worked with maternity information systems in the UK and New Zealand. So the data only has to be entered into their electronic record, and then that pushes then through into Grow and plots it onto the chart for them. Following user feedback, there was a clinical incident where a woman returned very quickly for another baby following a miscarriage. The previous chart had remained open, and so what the user did is rather than close the chart and start again, she edited over it. So what we've done is we've implemented automatic closure of pregnancies. So we're constantly looking at the system to risk assess it to make sure that it's safe for clinical practice and it's of ease for use for our users. And also, as women return for previous pregnancies, that data that's captured in the pregnancy before, once entered into Grow 2.0, pulls through and populates the next one. So you don't have to keep entering all of the previous baby details every time. We're also adding in notifications to users. So as Nuzat said, the training is a big part of using customised charts, and it will alert the user when their gap training is due so they can keep up to date with that. You'll be able to, users are able to now retrieve a customised centile. So back in the UK, as part of our Saving Babies Lives Care bundle, there is a recommendation that you should do a centile at the anomaly scan. So now users can do a customised centile for that anomaly scan and ensure that the same standard is used throughout the pregnancy. And also, as I said, the gap score is fully integrated. It's the potential then to be able to audit more cases and the clinical confirmation for data integrity. To Grow 2.0, like any system, takes time to embed, and I'd like to show you some of the improvements that we've already seen it make in clinical care. So we reviewed data from the first 9 sites to roll out Grow 2.0, who use the application end-to-end, from the creation of the charts at booking, plotting measurements throughout, and then all the way through to the postnatal creation of a customised centile. For those 9 sites, we compared the data longitudinally from Q2 of 2023 to some of the data from the 3 years preceding. Again, from the same quarter to ensure that we controlled for seasonal trends such as outcomes in stillbirth. We were pleased to find that the comparison of the baseline data, so that was pre-Grow 2.0 training or influence at all, and the current data, the detection of SGA babies increased from 40.4% to 52.1%, representing a 28.7% increase, making it statistically significant. The false positive rates did also slightly increase, but reassuringly were not significant. And then finally, we saw that the proportion of babies that were deemed at risk due to smallness were delivered after 40 weeks, but after actually reducing, meaning that there were more babies that were before receiving the appropriate care. So to conclude our early findings of Grow 2.0, results with the system are showing improvements in antenatal detection and timely delivery of babies at risk due to fetal growth restriction. Contributing factors may also include the auto plotting that I mentioned, the automated display of fetal growth velocity, and the prompts for users for regular growth assessment. Increased false positive rates will require audit and improved quality assurance of accuracy of scans and estimated fetal weights. So then, further work we've looked at is GrowChart India, which Nuzat kindly mentioned. We've made it available to users that have already expressed an interest. The cost is actually 10,000 Indian rupees as for an annual license. But as Nuzat mentioned, for people who have joined the conference this weekend, it will be reduced to £8,000. If £8,000, that's a lot. That's a lot. 8,000 Indian rupees if you sign up this weekend. It gives users the option to customise or partially customise. So if there's a time constraint, it does give you the option just to do a partially customised chart. But this remains a paper version that is available to clinicians, so who have perhaps limited technology available to them in some of their institutes. So this is a smaller data set to the new Grow 2.0. It doesn't include some of the features for the risk lower and the growth velocity calculation. However, users have the option, as I say, to either fully customize or partially customize. In this example, the ethnic origin has been omitted, and the centile lines on the right are still calculated based on the information that has been inputted to the system. Any omitted data uses the regional average, so despite here the ethnic origin being omitted, it will still be an Indian chart that is created, but it will take into consideration how many babies the mom's had before, her height, and her booking weight. Therefore, ensuring that even though it's perhaps not fully customised, it will still fit the population for the care that you provide to your population, unlike some of the other charts that consider a global one-size-fits-all. So when the chart is printed, for any details that have been omitted, it will appear as not selected. So if it's perhaps a colleague that's created it, you can see what parts have been customised and which ones have not. But then further still, to encourage the use and to assist with looking at your own referral and detection rates, you're still able to do the end-to-end process of the creation of the chart, the plotting, but also the creation of a customised birth weight centile for that baby. So by entering the chart ID, it will pull back the mother details and her characteristics. It's not patient identifiable. The chart will include the name at the top, but it's only held in memory. So her name is not held on servers anywhere. We can't retrieve a chart by searching the mother's name. So we'd need to check the details here on the left that those match to the chart that has been created for her. Once verified, the baby and the birth details can then be entered. So this one is a particularly early delivery at 31 weeks, a live birth of a little girl. There wasn't any suspicion of SGA from a fundal height measurement, and there were no plots of estimated fetal weight below the 10th centile. So we then click next, which will then give us our customised birth weight centile for that baby, which that baby sits on the 0.0 centile. It's red because it's SGA. Anything above the 10th and below the 90th will be green. And a red one again will just draw the eye to ensure that the postnatal management of this baby is appropriate. Early feeding, making sure that we're keeping the baby warm. Just the normal, doesn't require necessarily any intervention. Just making sure that mom's got that baby on the breast regularly, they've initiated breastfeeding, etc. So anyone who would like to sign up following the event, then you can do so here. But I know that Nuzat has got something at the Fernandez stand that you can complete with all your details. And then when I'm back in England next week, I can then process all of those for you and give you access. So you'll have your own username and password. There will be a link to the e-learning. So you'll be able to consolidate what we've done here with e-learning. And of course, any other colleagues that haven't been able to join us this weekend who would be interested, please do ask them to complete the form that you can see there. And we'll be more than happy to get in touch with them and grant them access. So thank you for listening. That's probably all from me. And any questions?
Yes, it is your turn now with more questions, please.
Jason, in India, obviously, there's lots of different regions. So when we're creating the,
Yes.
do you want to talk about the coefficients?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And of course, there are variations. Having said that, and I think I'll show this in one of my lectures, probably tomorrow. I'll show that the coefficient that we have derived, and I'll explain that the coefficients, the set of coefficients for the population include what is the average term, what we call the term optimal weight for the population. And I think it is here 3,200 and something grams. And then when you compare that from what we derived in Hyderabad, with a publication from the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, AIMS, then it is about 10 grams difference. That was in Delhi. Having said that, there is absolutely, must be a lot of variation around this huge country with many different states, different populations. And what we tend to do is that in the practice of recording information, anonymized information, we are also at the same time able to derive the data that allows us to create locally relevant standards. Does that make sense? So therefore, part and parcel of more and more people in another state using like Uttar Pradesh or further up or even in Kashmir, you would have data entered which allows us to then derive locally relevant coefficients for normal outcome pregnancies. So that is very much on the agenda. I'm glad you highlighted that as an issue going forward, so that eventually we will not just have one Indian standard, but local standards for the whole country. Yeah, there's much more information on our website, and there's also application PDFs of papers that our presentations are based on, and you're very welcome to download them. I'm not sure whether we're linked to a browser here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi.
I want to just ask, if I start using these protocols, if I'm using at my hospital, okay, but I am attached to other 2 hospitals also, can I use the same app or same website for those hospitals also? It's my query basically. Is there any...
Okay, can I? And there's one thing that probably we ought to first make it clear. Emily presented 2 applications. One of them is the Growth 2.0 that we have now improved on with auto-plotting and fetal growth velocity and so on and so on. And that is for implementing in institutions. And then she showed the Grow India lighter chart, which is for printing out. The first one is electronic, and that can be shared with in different hospitals, but there needs to be a data sharing agreement between the hospitals that they're okay to access it. If you use it as an individual practitioner, the Grow India chart, then it is printed out, and it will be up to the mother, expectant mother, to go with to the other hospital and say that this is my chart. It doesn't tend to get lost in the hospital system because she looks after it and then presents it to the clinicians there. So she is then the owner. She is always the owner anyway. And interoperability, as we say, is 100%.
Okay. And what if I will register for this app? Fine, that's fine for web, whatever is available on internet. Okay, I will share this app with on internet with other hospital also. But what if other consultant also want to use the same data for the from the same institute? I'm working at one institute where are 10 other doctors, 10 other gynecologists working there. That's fine. Okay, I have purchased it. I have paid for it. Doesn't matter. Even if I want to share my this application with other consultants also, then.
So that would be an institutional implementation. And what we usually do at present is to make that dependent on the size of the institution, the number of deliveries, and the number of clinicians involved. And we would then, if you write to us, we then develop a quote for which is appropriate. And it's of course also dependent on whether you want to have a chart which is printed out or an electronic chart. So the way to take that forward, and we do this a lot from around the world actually, is that we invite you to a Zoom or a Teams talk with the relevant stakeholders and discuss what would be the most appropriate for your population and which way would you like to have it implemented and use it in your practice. So we're very easy to find, perinatal.org.uk, and you're very welcome to get in touch with us, but also very kindly Pallavi and Nuzat have made available that you can get further information at the Fernandez stand.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
One was that very many of these women would come for booking very much later. So 28 weeks, sometimes 32. They may be seen elsewhere. So if I have to implement this as a form of a weight that I enter, her booking weight may not be available to me. Will that create problems? May not always be.
Although not entirely reliable, you could ask mom what her weight was at early pregnancy or just before pregnancy. That would probably be slightly more accurate. If she didn't know, I think we just have to resort Jason, to using the current weight that we have got.
Yeah, and even if not perfect, your estimate and the mother's estimate of what she was will still be much better than using a chart which doesn't adjust at all.
Okay. There's just another thing. I don't know whether Manju ma'am would be able to help me out on it. I work for a large government teaching hospital, and as a result of which I wonder if I need to use these charts, whether I need to get government clearance. Because it'll be transfer of information across 2 countries. I don't know whether, because I did think of this a long time ago. I did approach, then you didn't have the Grow India chart as well then. So I was wondering whether we'll have to do something on that count.
The data,
I'm not too sure.
The data would never leave your country.
The data wouldn't leave the country.
No, the servers are hosted here. In fact, I think we have a server in Mumbai, so the data would never leave the country, and of course it's all non-patient identifiable anyway. So there wouldn't be any data held offshore. It's all held here in India.
I just want to know, Sangeeta, that in case you want it for your institution, you are going to take it, the institution is going to buy it from them. So I think this kind of a MOU will have to be signed, that the data protection and the data privacy will be maintained. So that kind of thing will... No, that is right, but you have to have your records straight. Yeah, there has to be a MOU which will be signed between your institution and the team.
Sir, in India, we are not having sufficient gynecologists who are confining to the cities only, sir. And if we go to the rural areas, there are referral systems. And here, we always believe in, we used to teach us the mother should carry for 10 lunar months, that is 280 days, and at the same time, our outlet, pelvis outlet should be 10 centimeter size, and height and weight, height comparing with your physique and other things are BMI concerned. Also, we see some people who are short-statured in the rural areas, still who are not exposed to the ultrasonography or any of the things. And we were taught about the paperless partogram previously. Of course, that you have enlightened in a super way. But in implementation part of it is concerned, it is very difficult at the second and even in tertiary level also. So, sir, just by going with the paperless partogram also, we can conclude. And I said there was a famous song, Jiski Bibi Badi Hai, उसका भी बड़ा नाम है, and जिसकी बीवी छोटी है उसका भी बड़ा नाम है, because in the sense they have produced healthy children without interfering ourselves. We are the culprits. We are so many of the gynecologists. We are going for cesareans and doing so many other things. Let us follow the ethics, and if that is there, I think we can do so much to the entire world or to the nation, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. You're highlighting some very important issues in addition to what we are presenting here today, which relates to access to maternity services in rural areas, and of course, the availability of ultrasound and other technology. And so, of course, there is the low-tech way of still continuing maternity care, and that's where perhaps the fundal height measurements will become so important to at least have that as an ongoing measurement during pregnancy. But the most important thing I hope that you will be able to take away from today is the importance of increasing awareness that many of these deaths are potentially avoidable. And so therefore, to undertake, to have the motivation to try to improve practice in this way, and also to monitor practice in this way.
Dr. Jason, I just wanted to know that whatever data we feed in the app, it will be accessible to you. You will be able to access that as well, no?
Sorry, whatever data?
The data which is filled in, whatever data of our patients we are going to fill into the app, will it be, would it be accessible to you all also? Your center, I'm to say someone from UK?
Okay, so we are able to look at completely anonymized data only. So the data itself, with all any identifiable data, which in fact is not recorded in the Light app, but in the Road 2.0, any identifiable data is staying in the country. But then we have the ability to completely anonymize and look at information that can then help to improve the system and to help to improve it, make it more local and make it more relating to the outcomes and so on. So there's a constant learning involved in that. And that's the best part of an audit cycle,
Exactly. And the first version, I'm to say both the versions are available, no, you said? So
yes.
In the first version, there is no access to people outside the country of the data.
No, either one. It's not, and that's why we make sure that there is local servers. And it's not just India. Every country is very keen to make sure that data does not get exported. So we know that issue, and we've dealt with it several years ago, and make sure that that does not exist as a problem.
I was asking this because this issue is going to come if we roll it out in public sector.
Yes, and we'd be very keen to discuss with the public sector how we can assist that, because also the issue that we've learned in this process over the years is economies of scale. So currently we're supporting, apart from Fernandez Hospital, working with them, we're supporting lots of individual practitioners to make sure this helps in their practice. But the public health sector would be able to reach so many more women who sometimes need it even more than the private sector, and to make sure that that particular aspect of the maternity care is covered. And we would love to make sure, but from the outset, as far as data sovereignty is concerned, that is something that we're well aware of, and make sure that it exists.
Thank you.
Ma'am, just wanted to add on to it. For any application to be like produced to the government, so we have to abide to Ayushman Bharat Digital Mission guidelines, which says the data ownership, like you said, lies with the government server, but not the others. So that itself, like, is a first step. And the second thing is they look as per that. Any of the mother identifier data shouldn't be present. So I think while Emily was taking us through, name of the mother wasn't present, or so it is only the unique identifier that you are putting. So which is a second step of doing it, that it can be definitely be put into or recommended to the government. Like Manju ma'am recommended, it's kind of MOU between the both sides and a non-disclosure statement, which helps data ownership and privacy security and everything. And the third step is every government, to any government in the country, so they'll ask for a security audit certificate. So once this step is also done, so your application is good to go onto a government server.
If you could facilitate a way in which that could be, the discussion could be taken.
I'm from Fernandez Foundation. Actually, we have a Promise app. Dr. Salima is here. So we're on a process of, we are developing it with UNICEF, LMS. So we are process of putting it to the government server. So we knew the steps how to go about and what the government needs and how to.
So Nina will be the facilitator.
But
Yeah,
it
just
was-
wanted to add, ma'am.
No, but it was very important that data transfer across the boundaries was the major concern, because we have had talks before. And thank you to the Perinatal Institute for getting the server in India, because that would be one of the major problems that we overrun. We were not able to move forward. We are also doing, Chatura is working in Andhra Pradesh, where we are having a CCF. Nina is working in Andhra Pradesh, where they have a lot of centers, and it would be the appropriate place to roll it out.
And what I said was that currently it is in Mumbai, but of course it can be on the government servers, and that is, we've got a whole team that would work with and make sure that that's where it is. Did you want to say anything else? Sorry, please go ahead. But I'd be very happy to follow this up with a conversation of the relevant people who could make this happen. And we're here all the way till Sunday night. And so even if you at short notice wanted to have a discussion about this, we'd be very happy to do that.
I think it's amazing that we are having this discussion. We have Government of Telangana representatives also here, and several of the other government representatives. I think UP is here. We have Orissa here, and Tamil Nadu is also here. So there are a couple of government representatives here. As UNICEF, we facilitate whatever is possible for the government depending on the requests that we receive from the government. And I think the fact that they're all here will really help us gain that kind of ownership to this particular entry point. And the project in AP, which will be very exciting because that is more in our hands and it's more of an implementation project. So would be happy to have that conversation. In fact, my Chief of Health would also be here tomorrow, and Dr. Vivek, and we can have a bilateral discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so we close the session. Thank you so much, Professor Jason and Emily. That was an excellent session. And we at Fernandez agree that we cannot do the OP or the clinic without the grow chart or without the measuring tape. I'm sure all of you will take a lot of points from here, and all of us will have grow charts to improve care and outcomes. Thank you again. Thank you all for attending the...
Thank you for organizing this and for your attendance and for your contribution. I think that's what makes it a good workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much.